Startlingly, one of the most common requests I get is not necessarily topics to discuss, but to use my years of experience of being an Overwatch coach to make guide content for Dead by Daylight. The problem with that is that, much like Overwatch, I'm not mechanically good at Dead by Daylight. I was never mechanically good at Overwatch either. I was a very low rank in Overwatch, only really ever reaching around max low plat. But that's because while my game sense and my decision making were pretty good, I didn't have the mechanics to ever back up the things that I was trying to do, which is why my best role was always tank. So when it comes to Dead by Daylight, I don't really have the mechanics to back up making a guide style content. But then as I was playing solo queue these past few weeks, mostly only solo queue, I started to realize that I can do the same thing I did in Overwatch and teach people better decision making and better game sense while not necessarily trying to teach people how to effectively loop or things like that. So today I wanted to go ahead and try out making guide content. And if you guys like this, then I'll go ahead and Jesus Christ. Then I'll go ahead and I'll start trying to make more. Welcome to the first episode of Kaiser's Declassified DBD Survival Guide, where I don't focus on teaching you mechanics, looping, or anything like that, and instead focus on teaching game sense and decision making. In a game like Daylight by Dead, mistakes can cost more than the current interaction, and for survivors, mistakes can often lead to a snowball for the killer. Now, I don't want to overload people with information, and I also want to test the water, so after the video's finished, let me know if you want more of these, but for now, let's get into it. Today, we're going to cover the topic of panicking. Dead by Daylight can be a scary game. You load in, you start working on a generator, and over the sound of the gen noises and whatever podcast you're listening to, you start to hear the heartbeat. If you're deaf like me, you have the visual heartbeat turned on. If you're curious about how to turn this on, because I do greatly recommend it, then you're going to go under accessibility settings, and it should be right there for you to click and just turn on. Now, from seeing the heartbeat, you have three options. One, continue to work on the gen without a care in the world. Bunny rabbit, slowly walk from the gen to hide scratch marks and take a position somewhere in LOS of the gen, but not perfectly in sight. Or C, run like a mad lad as fast as you can, revealing the scratch marks and drawing a line right to your position. Turns out C is the wrong answer, but whether you do one or bunny rabbit is entirely dependent on the strength of the heartbeat. I always recommend turning on the visual heartbeat, especially when you're first starting out, as the heartbeat grows in intensity the closer the killer gets, and it kind of teaches you ranges as well. Even if you can hear perfectly, it's just a better indicator of how close the killer is going to get to you. In order to accurately make the right decision, check the intensity. If it's still smallish, then stick to the gen, but once it starts getting bigger, but before there start getting little lightning bolt veins around it, then you want to start walking away for a good hiding spot. Don't sprint unless you have to. Sprinting should only be done when the killer is literally about to show up to the gen, and walking away is just going to let them get a free hit. While we are on the subject of gens, another thing to keep in mind is if you blow a gen, it is perfectly okay to keep working that gen. Yes, it alerts the killer to your position, but it doesn't mean they're coming for you necessarily. Remember, the longer a game goes on, the more beneficial for the killer. So you want to get every second that you can on a generator within a safe and reasonable amount of time. The biggest thing about what I see the most mistakes happening is people will blow a gen and then they'll instantly get up and they'll start walking slowly away to try to go find a hiding spot. And then they'll crouch in that hiding spot for upwards of 30 seconds while the killer is finished fucking jacking off or chasing another survivor or watching reruns of Grey's Anatomy, whatever they're doing. And then the killer saunters over to the gen, goes, this is weird, kicks it, and then walks away. That 25 of that 30 seconds could have been spent working on a gen, which if you don't know, gens take 90 seconds to complete. So if you just spent that additional 25 seconds working on the gen and then walked away and stayed safe for 5 seconds, then you would have progressed the gen way further. Another thing to keep in mind is that when a killer kicks a gen, the rate at which that gen regresses is incredibly slow. It takes 5 seconds of working on a gen to make up for 20 seconds of regression. So just remember that. As long as you're not hearing that tear radius, just keep going. Some of you are concerned about stealth killers, but really you should always have your camera on a swivel until you confirm what killer it is. Always be looking for a stealth killer because most of them cannot attack you off rip. So if you see them coming, you can act accordingly. The third and final tip for Jins is if you hear the heartbeat, look at the HUD. This thing is extremely helpful for helping you make the correct decisions, and in future episodes, we'll be using it a lot. So I want you to learn what the HUD does and what it tells you it can do. When someone is in chase, including yourself, you will see these little bone things on the side of the portraits. Not the big bones that signify the obsession, they're these very tiny little ones, and they start moving. If you're working on a Jin and you hear the heartbeat but see these bone things moving, that means someone is being chased nearby, and it's okay to stick the Jin. Just as always, keep an eye out to ensure the killer is not breaking chase to pressure your Jin. Now let's talk about unhooks and healing. The first thing we all need to realize is that unless you are afflicted with hemorrhage, the healing bar does not go down when you aren't healing. A lot of people feel like you need to finish a heal off rip, and if you don't have the full 16 seconds to heal, then it isn't worth it. But in reality, let's say you unhook someone and neither of you are in the killer's terror radius. That's a good time to start the heal. If the killer's terror radius gets too big, much like I was describing in the generator section, run away and have the healthy person draw aggro. Let the injured person go find another teammate or a med kit and finish their heal. Way too many times I see people get unhooked and then instantly run to Narnia in an attempt to heal, and way too many times this results in them running straight into the killer's area and getting ran up on because there's a big ass beacon of scratch marks pointing towards that spot. Healing under the hook is something you have to use the terror radius for deciding on, but under no circumstances ever do you run to the opposite side of the map to heal. Instead, what you want to do is find nearby cover. Most of the time, what you want is a loop that's easily ran in opposite directions. If you can find a nearby pallet, don't heal under the pallet, but instead heal on one side. The reasoning for this is because if the killer is coming from one direction and you're both directly underneath the pallet, then you're not going to be able to necessarily get to the opposite way, whoever is noticing the killer first, and you can end up body blocking each other. If you're on one side of the pallet, you're basically playing a 50-50 game with the killer, where the person who's closest to the pallet will have an option to drop if the killer is on the opposite side. If the killer is coming toward your pallet, then it's not as good, but it's still better to have that 50-50 than it is to just have a guaranteed body block happen. Speaking of healing, however, again, just like Jins, what we need to do is learn to pay attention to the HUD. If someone is being chased, commit to the heal. If they aren't, then watch the terror radius and make sure the killer is not about to walk up on you. A really good thing to do, and this is a good way to avoid panic, is to be able to heal in a area where you can move your camera up above walls or around corners so you can actively watch for where the killer is going to be coming from, especially if you know where they were last. This is actually one of the most important things about trying to make sure that you don't panic, is to always have an idea about where the killer was at a certain time. One of the ways you can do this is you can kind of pay attention to when noise notifications go off, because you do get noise notifications whenever your teammates do things like cleanse a totem. If you can watch where your teammate was last or where your teammate was heading last, and then you see them being chased, you know about where the killer is, and it helps your decision making a lot more. Another common occurrence with unhooking has to do with rushing for unhooks. One time, I managed to get 3 people down before the first gen had popped. The last person had 3 options: give up and let me down them, pop the gen and alert me, or take the time to slowly get one unhook, then draw my aggro while the unhooked became the unhooker. The first 2 decisions would be the results of panicking, and if they had taken the third decision and sprinted for the unhook, trying desperately to get a save, then it probably would not have ended well. But what ended up happening, because of the way they played this, they got the 3-man out in the end, only losing 1 person because that person had an obsession with going back to the same gen every time I caught them, which will be a completely different video in the future. But there will be so many instances where people will rush for an unhook. You got to remember, each stage takes 60 seconds, and you move as a survivor at 4 meters a second, meaning you have time. There's no need to rush as soon as they get hooked. Take your time and make sure it's safe. The best bet is to always make sure you're heading toward them by the 30-second mark. Moving on, let's talk about some general panic decisions that lead to death. There's this really common tactic that Swifts like to employ called protect the president. Essentially what they will do is have all three people body block a killer carrying a survivor, causing the killer to have to swing and giving the survivor more time to wiggle. The right way to do this is to have everyone take a single hit and then run away. The wrong way to do this is to freak out and keep attempting to body block while injured because that person is on death hook. Look, sometimes there's nothing you could do about a person on death hook about to be hooked. And oftentimes letting one or even two of you get down to try to save that person will result in a 3 or 4K. It's important to weigh the distance to the hook, and while it's not always going to be that simple, and a lot comes with experience over lessons, I have faith in you. Another common panic decision is dropping pallets. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk overly about looping, but I do want to make this kind of clear. While there's not necessarily such thing as wasting pallets, because there's way too many pallets on the map to begin with, there's also such a thing as not using them wisely, right? It's not wasting, it's more of not getting the most out of what you have. Pallets are a chase extender. It's something that you use in order to give your team a few extra seconds in order to fully take advantage of the fact that you are in chase. So don't drop pallets when you're healthy unless one, you're going against an insta-down killer, or two, you can clearly see that there is a way for you to get from the pallet you're currently at to at least 2 other pallets. Try to save pallets from when you're injured. You can get to another pallet immediately, or alternatively, you can guarantee the stun, or almost guarantee the stun, because the stun mechanics are kind of weird in this game. But if you use it just to use it, then you're actively not extending the chase as far as you can. Most of the time, whenever I see people pre-dropping pallets consistently, it's because they're panicked and they just don't want to take a hit. But it's okay to take a hit. If you're not exposed, take the M1. It's okay. You'll be fine. You get a speed boost and you can most of the time get out of there. It's very, very difficult to make a chase worth it if you're not injured. And if you are consistently pre-dropping like 4 different pallets every single time the killer comes after you before they even get a hit on you, then they're not going to chase you, and it's going to not give your team the amount of time that they need to take gens. Take the hit. You'll be fine. And that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down below some examples of panicking you wish people would avoid. And if this guide helped you learn something, then let me know. As always, a special thank you to my channel members, Nuclear Bomb and Spirit Upgrades, for their additional support. And don't forget about the October sale on my limited edition hoodies. Other than that, I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.